Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane. I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library in Massachusetts, and I am really thrilled to be here with Dana Hawkins, who wrote the book. Oh, wait a minute. I'm going to pull it up so I don't say it wrong because I did that the other day and I was like, I'm so embarrassed. In Walked Trouble. It's the sequel to Not in the Plan, and both are hilarious and heartwarming, but we'll talk about that more in a second. And you don't need my opinion. Need to read them yourselves. So, Dana is here to talk about that, but before we get to her, I just wanted to say thanks to the Friends of the Ashland Public Library for supporting all of our programs, and also to Dana for letting us share this program with other libraries who have been promoting it as well. So we hope that folks from all the libraries come in and are welcome. So today, if you've been to my programs before, you know I'm usually in webinar mode where we can't hear or see you, but you can ask questions through the Q&A. Today we're in meeting mode, so you can put your questions in the chat if you want me to moderate them, or you can unmute yourself and you're welcome to ask Dana your questions directly. Okay, so Dana is an amazing author. I think you know that just from my introduction. Like I said, In Walk Trouble is the sequel to Not in the Plan, as she describes it, a sapphic rom-com with coffee in Seattle with happy ever after and fantastic queer enemies to lovers romance. I mean, it's just got sort of everything that I love. So I'm really excited to be here with Dana. Dana, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Awesome. And we are excited to have you. So first question for me is
Yes.
to tell us a little bit about yourself and then also about In Walked Trouble.
So I am Dana Hawkins. I am currently in Minnesota. I lived in Seattle for 20 years and over the summer decided to move back to my hometown, which is central Minnesota. It's a very small town and it is a little bit of a culture shock. I feel like I'm in my own rom-com where I was from the big city and then moved back to the small town. Um, but I am a mom of three and I write sapphic rom-coms. I also write some heteronormative rom-coms. I have one coming out at the end of the month, but I know that we're here to talk about our sapphic romances. And yeah, that's really it. It's just me living in Minnesota, here from Seattle, and right, yeah.
Fantastic. So tell us a little bit, since they're a duology right now, can you tell us
Mhm.
about your the sapphic books? And we can certainly talk about any of your books.
Yeah. So my sapphic books, starting with Not in the Plan, that was the first in the series. I am going to have three. I just announced earlier this week that the publishers asked for a third book to continue on with the series. So I'm super excited. So I'm sort of frantically writing that on the side. But the first book was about Mac and Charlie, a woman with writer's block and a coffee shop owner, and they get together. And so, but In Mock Trouble, which is really what we're going to talk about today, is more of an enemies to lover. It is features Maya and Remi, and Remi is a little bit salty and snarky, and I really loved writing her because it's this alter ego that she kind of says everything that I wish I could say, and I never have the courage to say. So she was super fun. And then Maya is a nursing student, and they are both competing at a bar for a cash prize. They both need bonus for their own particular reasons. And so in my mind, when I started writing it, I was thinking of Cocktail. I'm going to age myself, but the Tom Cruise movie where they were flipping bottles. I love that movie. And I thought, ooh, how cool would it be to do something like that? And Coyote Ugly, I think, is the name of the other one, and just kind of mix them together. So really strong female characters that really dislike each other, but then end up falling in love.
Love it. Yeah, I definitely got the snark and the humor and um, that slow burn into
Yeah,
romance. I love it.
no, thanks.
So we will talk about your books in a second, but I do want to ask you about yourself. Like, were you always a reader?
I was always a reader, but interestingly enough, I rarely read romance. And so when I was younger, I was super into, Babysitter Club books and Sweet Valley High. And I stole my mom's Danielle Steele, when I was younger. But other than that, I read exclusively thrillers and mysteries. up until the pandemic. And I had more time, you know, in the pandemic, as I think everyone did. And I went to the library and I thought, you know what, I should check out my library. And I talked to the woman and I said, I have always wanted to write a romance. I didn't read romance, but I wanted to write a romance. And I said, do you have some contemporary books that you can recommend for me? And the very first romance book that I read that she recommended was The Heart Principle by Helen Hong. And I loved it. Oh my gosh,
Yes.
it opened up my eyes. I didn't realize that romance stories could be like that, you know, have like really diverse characters and have struggle with issues. And for those who have not read it, she's autistic. The writer is autistic herself, if I'm correct, and the main character. And she has family issues and she's a caretaker for her father, I think. It's been a couple of years now, but it just opened up this entire world of romance books to me. And then I just couldn't get enough. And I just read and I read and I read. And then I started almost sadly reading for research because these writers were so amazing that, but I mean, obviously I still enjoy it, but I moved from that to sapphic romances. I really got into Ashley Herring Blake. So she did Delilah Green. She has a Bright Falls series, Rachel Lacey. I'm in a space on all these other ones. I just consume so much. So yes, I was always a reader, but never a writer. First time I sat down and wrote was in 2020.
I need to dig into that a little bit. So the first time you were a writer was in 2020.
Yes. So I had, ever since I was younger, I tell myself stories to go to sleep. So I was a storyteller, I felt like in my head, but I never really wrote anything down. I would say when I was younger, you know, I have some notebooks with some short stories, or I had a creative writing class like in my high school, but really never was a writer. And probably a lot of it was because I had kids, you know, I don't, you know, and now my children are a little bit older. And so I had a little bit more time, but yeah, so I didn't, and I haven't taken really any writing classes. I've gone to some conferences. I didn't take it in college. And so there is part of me that honestly is a little bit self-conscious. So if someone was to ask me, what is a preterite, or I don't even know the right word. I don't know. What is a proper pronoun? Not sure. You know, I can tell you what a verb is, and that's about where my grammar schooling lies. But I love storytelling, and thank God I have an amazing editor that will put in all my commas when I have the subjects on all the areas. So yeah.
Wow. But you always kind of like to write, or is that what you're saying? You kind of had those ideas and but weren't actually like working towards publishing. You were just kind of like,
right. Yeah, I always like to tell myself stories in my head. So I didn't, you know, I rarely physically wrote it down. And so really what kicked this off was, again, during the pandemic, I had thought that I would just write the story that has been in my head since I was a kid. And it was this romance story. It was maybe someday it'll be out in the world. It was my first one. And as we learned in the publishing business, I thought it was the best thing ever. And it really was not. And it never got picked up. It took me multiple books before I kind of developed the craft. But it was a story that I told myself when I was younger, which at the time was about Donnie Wahlberg and New Kids on the Block. And it was kind of a cute little, we meet in an elevator kind of story. And then it evolved. And so over the pandemic is where I was like, you know, I'm going to write this down and really, and just have it on paper so I can, you know, I don't know, just have it for myself.
I love that because, you know, so writers, like when I ask these questions, you know, there's certainly that sense of, you know, I wanted to be a writer, I was a big reader, whatever. But I love the idea of somebody who just loves telling stories and then just sits down one day and just starts writing. And it could be like, you could be in your 30s, 40s. You know, we have some authors locally that, you know, are very, very popular, and they started writing in their 70s. I love that.
Oh my gosh, I love that. So yeah, I'm happy to age myself. So I did not pick up a pen until well into my 40s. And I'm so glad that I did. And so I think there's sometimes I talk to a lot of young writers and they're like, well, I'm already 25 and I haven't done this. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm almost 50 and I just started this. And like, I'm loving it. I'm just getting like, you have your whole world ahead of you. So yeah, I think age is just a number. I met a man over the weekend actually at a writing conference, and it was his first writing conference, and I did a critique package for him, and he graduated in 1965, and he wrote a series of short stories about what it was like to graduate back then. And he just said, you know, I'm just kind of starting this and I'm loving it. I'm like, this is amazing. Like, good for you that you're getting into this now.
Yeah, because for a lot of people, it is a dream, you know, and you think
Mhm.
it's so
Yeah.
it's not easy, but
Mm-mm.
it is something that you can do.
Yes.
So what was your journey then to starting getting words on paper? Did you have an
Mhm.
agent? Did you go, did you do this yourself? What was your journey there?
So, with my first book that I wrote, that hopefully someday will see the light of day, I just sat down and wrote. I just word vomited everywhere. And like I said before, I was like, oh, this is the greatest book ever written. I mean, it is just going to get picked up and Netflix going to come to my door. I probably won't even have to pitch them. Like, it's brilliant, you know? And then I got an incredible critique partner, and she's like, do you know your first two chapters are literally just her thinking and backstory? And like, you know, they kind of suggest not to do that. And I just didn't know. And so this critique partner had said, you know, here are a couple of good craft books that you can read. And I want to say it was maybe like Stephen King's On
Okay.
Writing, something like that. Yep. And then I think Save the Cat, which is huge in the writer's world. I feel like that's the number one. And then she suggested a couple of podcasts. And so I started listening to podcasts. And then I really started working on the craft. And so I was picking up constant craft books. I mean, now I have really a plethora of them. There's so many for writers, like Method Acting for Writers is a great book. Story Genius is a great book. Donald Moss, I think it's like the emotional craft of fiction or something like that. There's just so many. And so I was just consuming. And then I went back and I edited my book, and then I edited again. And then I wrote another book, and then I wrote another one and another one. And so what I started is I started querying right away. And I ended up getting more interest than what, now that I knew how hard it was, I got more interest even in my first book than I thought. And some pretty well established agents and agencies, they ultimately rejected, which is fine. And that kind of led me to building up my confidence. And so then I wrote my second book. And that is another tip, I think, for querying authors is when you're querying, just keep writing, write another one, and then write another one. Otherwise, you're going to be looking at your email every day and am I getting rejected? Am I getting accepted? And so I wrote another one. These were both heteronormative books. And then I wrote a third one, and it was my third one, which is going to be coming out at the end of this month. Publishing is very interesting. So it was my third book that I wrote, but it will be this year my last book published because it's with a different publishing house than what my sapphic novels are with. And their process just took a lot longer. And so I did get that deal without an agent. I submitted directly to the publisher. I'd met the publisher at a conference, which we could probably go into an entire, I don't know, sub conversation about privilege. And I had the luxury of being able to pay for this conference where I could pitch to that. And I do have some feelings about that. But that's where I got my first book deal. And then same with that, I started writing my sapphic novels, and I had heard about a publisher, Storm Publishing. I had heard about them from an author named Jenny Hale. She has written multiple like Hallmark style books. I think she had a couple of movies that were Hallmark movies, and my parents are huge Hallmark fans. And so I'd kind of heard of her. And she had started with a publishing house called Bookatour, and that CEO of Bookatour left and started Storm. And so I had heard of them and I knew of them and I felt they were very reputable. And I thought, I'm just going to take a chance and just send it to them without an agent, see what happens. And they offered me a book deal. Two book deals, actually. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, were those for your sapphic books or your?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Those were for the sapphic ones. Yes.
I just want to go back to the thing you said about privilege, because I think that's really interesting, given that you're writing sapphic books, because there's just seems to be so many barriers around getting books like sapphic books, MM books, anything diverse or like really whatever, different out there into the hands of readers, unless you indie
Yeah.
publish. So I'm really like pleased that you were able
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah.
However way you were making it happen, because you're bringing books to the readers that aren't really out there as much as we would like for them to be.
Right, right. I very much so. And I feel very lucky that I have such a supportive publisher. I mean, they have been an absolute dream to work with.
Mhm.
But yeah, there is definitely a blocker, I think, out there for getting these books into people's hands. And I think it's potentially going to get worse. And that makes me a little nervous. And yeah, so
Um, so let's talk too about doing both sapphic and heteronormative,
mhm,
whatever I know that
mhm.
word, books, because is there one that you found was easier to sell or easier to write, or what drew you to being able to do all of it?
So I am part of the queer community, and so it was very natural for me to write the sapphic romances. But it was also natural for me to write heteronormative books. I am more drawn to my sapphic romances. I think that feels a little bit more comfortable for me, and I'm so passionate about queer voices being elevated and uplifted and not silenced. And so I really kind of want to keep, heading towards that. So it's kind of interesting because I found getting the deal for the sapphic romances was easier
Hmm.
than I queried very few people, and I ended up getting two different publishing offers from two different groups, and I went with Storm. But it happened really quite quickly, which is good. Like that, it makes me so happy that these people were willing to snap it up.
Mhm. Do you think that at that time there was a drive for the sapphic books? Because I know there's like a ton of MM books out there. My
Mhm.
romance book club, we read them all the time, but
Yeah.
it's much harder for us to find really good sapphic romance.
Yeah, I think there was a little bit of a hunger for it, and I think that they were looking for it. And I kind of have that same issue too. Um, there's just not a lot, and I know it's like a niche group, but I feel like books like Red, White, and Royal Blue, which is
Mhm.
awesome. I
Yeah.
mean, whoever has read it absolutely loves that. But it is maybe I don't know if acceptable is the right word, but it's more common to have those male books rather than the sapphic books. But oh, I really hope that changes for so many reasons.
I know. Well, I mean, I just thought you have the triumvirate there, books for women, by women, and about women.
Mhm. About yeah,
So
yeah.
kind of hit it all that people kind of fuss
Mhm.
about. But I have to say that, we love them, and we're so grateful for them, because
Oh,
it is
good.
really hard to find
Yeah.
good books that not necessarily always reflect us, but reflect the world around us.
Mhm.
And yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I also think, and this is a very personal thing. This is not a judgment on any other authors or any other books, but in my books, I specifically write queer joy. So I do not have queer trauma attached with my books. There's no coming out stories. It's very much like Schitt's Creek style. If you've ever watched that show, I love it. That there's no yeah, there's just like no homophobia. It does not exist within my books. And I understand that people have to write the stories of the way that they want to in the books that are important to them. But for me, I'm like, I don't want that. I want to live in this like fantasy world where they have a bunch of issues, but it is not their identity.
Mhm. I I think that's amazing, because the book that comes to mind, and obviously the TV show Heartstopper, I just love that show. I love the books. But at every minute you're waiting for trauma, you're waiting for
Yeah.
abuse, right? Because you know that that's the world a lot of people live in the queer
Mhm.
community. So I like that in your book you don't have that sense of like impending doom.
Yes, yes. And I really did get that from Schitt's Creek because I remember watching that entire show and there were just a couple episodes I had that like cringe, like, ooh, who's gonna be mean to David, the main character? And when it never happened and it didn't happen the entire time, it was the most refreshing thing. I was just so uplifted. And I think there's a lot of studies on people that rewatch shows for comfort, and that just became my go-to. I'm just rewatch it because there was never once that moment of hate. We can cringe all day long at his outfits or the things he says or whatever, but not from hate. And that was just so it was really beautiful to me to see.
Mhm. Yeah. And I, we talk about Black joy, but we don't really talk about queer joy as much as we
Hmm.
should, and maybe
Yeah.
that's just the tides, things come and go, but I'm very, very
Yeah.
glad that your books are in the world. I think I've said that several
Oh,
times.
thank you.
Um,
Thank you.
so let's dig into these two books and then we can certainly talk
Sure.
about the others as we have time. But what comes first for you? The characters, the story, the plot, the setting? What happens for you when you're starting to write?
Definitely the characters. So it is very character driven. I really want to get into the head of these people. I go on walks and I have interviews with them in my head, and that may sound odd, but I'm like, so Charlie, what's your favorite movie? Or so Remi, what was the name of your cat at foster home number 3? So I really get all these details that I often actually don't even put into the book, but that way I really know who they are. So definitely character first, setting second. I knew that they were going to be in Seattle after a very short while, probably just because I was so comfortable. And if I needed inspiration, I could just run down to Pike Place Market, or I could, go get fish or whatever it was. And then after that is plot. So I start to go through things that I know. I know that this is also a common thing that authors talk about, is like, write what you know.
Mhm.
And to be honest, I'm a terrible researcher. And so I'm like, oh, do I really want to spend months trying to research what it's like to be a lawyer? Probably not. So coffee shop. I love coffee. I have coffee every day. I love coffee shops. It's just kind of my favorite happy place to be. And I was a writer. And so I was like, okay, we'll do a coffee shop owner and a writer.
Mhm.
Although even the writer is not very original. Now that I'm reading in more and more books, I'm like, oh my gosh, every character is either a bookseller or a writer. But I'm like, okay, that's fine. And then in Mock Trouble, I was a bartender for years. And so I just took the knowledge that I knew from when I was bartending when I was younger. And then the other character is a nursing student. And that was not, nursing is not in my family or anything, but it focused, I thought, less on her like nursing as it did on the bar.
Mhm.
And then her sister has type 1 diabetes within the book, and that's in my family. And so I knew a lot of that from personal experience. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Well, if you have like 20, 30 books eventually, you may
I'm
start
gonna have
like
to venture out.
running out of material. You'll have to go to your
Yep.
neighbors and stuff. I think that's
Exactly.
really interesting. And I think that makes a lot of sense to me because I think that we can connect more to the stories because they are authentic and true. So I really like that too. So when you are developing characters, how do they come to you? I mean, you
Oh,
said that the story actually comes to you later. So how do you
yeah.
develop characters without a storyline or a plot?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good question. It's so funny because it's different for me for the sapphic romances than the heteronormative. For the heteronormative, I have to find a picture of a man that matches my vision. And until I've found that picture, I can't develop his story. And I don't know why that is. With my sapphic romances, I never did have like a picture of the women. I had an idea in my mind, but I didn't have to like search AI or actresses or anything um, to get that. And I've already forgot your question. Can you say that again? I started going on a tangent.
That's okay. That's all interesting. But how do you develop characters without a storyline or a plot?
Oh, yeah. So when I started thinking about the characters and I started thinking about, like who they are, I had the essence of who I wanted them to be, and I was like, I love free spirited women. So I knew right away I developed Charlie. This is for my first book, not in the plan. I was like, I want a free spirit. I want someone fun and sweet and kind. And how would someone like that navigate life? What would she wear? And I pictured this woman like with these big flowy dresses and combat boots and like piercings and tattoos. And I thought, okay, like that's such a good character. And then I thought, okay, what is the opposite of her? Because I do like to do the opposites attract. I'm like, okay, someone who's more type A, rigid, quiet, shy, doesn't like a lot of people. And that's just kind of how I work from there, where I start creating those layers. And then same with In Mock Trouble. I did have a little bit of help with In Mock Trouble because it's a sequel. So I had to start developing these characters a while ago. And I knew well, I did the free spirited kind one. Now I want a salty one. I want one who is tough and she can box and she can kick someone's butt if she needs to. And she's, you know, really protective um, and strong willed. And so that's just how I started doing it.
Hmm. But Maya wasn't like, she wasn't, to me, like she wasn't the opposite of that. She held her own.
Mm-mm. Yeah, she really did. So with Maya, that was a little bit different because I went off of the opposites attract. In Not in the Plan, it was definitely opposites attract. But I knew when I actually first started doing Maya, I had her be like very quiet and shy. And I thought, oh gosh, I'm just doing Mac. I'm doing like Mac number 2 from the first book. So I said, okay, I have to change this around because I also didn't want the readers to hate Remi. And I didn't want Remi to be like so salty and have like this kind of demure woman that she was overpowering. And so I was like, okay, I need to change her a little bit and make her have a backbone as well and make her strong. And internally, she can struggle a little bit and feel a little nervous, but that exterior, I wanted her really strong.
Hmm. Um, I'm kind of curious about how you make sure that your characters don't get into toxic relationships with each other, because you said like you were finding character traits that kind of would meld but aren't, you know, like they're opposite, but they're not like, um, you know, in conflict. There's conflict, but they're
Yeah.
not in conflict. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and I've heard this about heteronormative, is that a lot of people in my romance book club read because there's not the toxic masculinity. So
Mm-hmm.
how do you handle that? Because you write both.
Yeah, that is a really interesting question. I will say in my heteronormative books, I do not have the alpha male. I mean, I guess they kind of are, but the men are very respectful, very sweet, very consensual. There's not like that alpha dog mentality really. And so with the sapphic romances, even if you have more of a stronger willed or alpha, I think not having the women trauma bond was kind of important to me. You can open up about past, but you're not going to be connected based on past trauma. Does that make sense? So you can be vulnerable, but that is not the reason why you're together. And I thought that was really important. And then also having, again, like consensuality within the sapphic relationships were super important. And so oddly enough, I had a negative Goodreads review that said, like, I think they said, yes, it's consensual. Do you have to keep asking? Because I had put in there multiple times, like, is this okay? Is this okay? Is this okay? And I thought that is such a weird thing to complain about. Like, it was too consensual. And I think that that's like also really important for not having a toxic relationship. And I think having the characters just in general, you can be snippy and snarky, but you're not like heavy disrespectful. That is a big thing. I did have my editor say though, I had to pull back on a couple things because I did write a few scenes where she's like, ooh, the readers are gonna absolutely hate Remi if you put that in there. So I had to cut some stuff out. And then at the end, I actually had a much softer breakup scene and I had to go harder on that, which really killed my heart. I did not, I mean, I like the breakup scene. I wrote it, but I didn't want to do it. I wanted it to be sweeter.
So that's curious too to me, like what, you know, the editor, you know, editors do have quite a bit of influence on making sure that there are no errors in the story and that things, there's no like, you didn't use Sasha over here and, you know,
Yeah.
Sahara over there or something. I just saw that. I just heard that in an audiobook today. I was like, wait a minute, who's she with? But your editor sounds like they really delve into the story as well.
Yeah, they really, really do. So there were definitely a few things where, like I said, with the fights, they wanted me to scale back on some of that I did. They wanted me to escalate on some that I did. They really, I'm lucky in the sense that in general the story was good. The story was how they wanted it, but you know I did have to do a few rewrites. Interestingly enough, they're the ones who chose the title. I actually had a different title for both of my books, and that got you. And I can say it. My Not in the Plan was Love and Rainbow Lattes, and then In Mock Trouble was Rainbow Cocktails, and it got mixed.
That's too.
Oh, I know.
I will get back into the story in a minute, but I did want to ask you before I forget about the covers. Like, did
Yes.
you have input on the covers? You know, like, is this part of that sort of cartoony trend, or did you just like, that's just what you wanted? How did that work?
Yes. Oh, that's such a great question. So I did have some input on it. They have a phenomenal graphic artist, and I knew that I wanted that cartoony kind of animated cover.
Mhm.
And when they sent it to me, I was completely blown away. For Not in the Plan, we made a couple tiny changes, but for In Mock Trouble, I'm like, don't touch it. It's perfect. I loved it. I yelled, actually, I yelped. That was really cool. But with
Mhm.
my third book, the publisher, I had no input. So that was interesting, and no changes allowed. So I
Nope.
shouldn't say no input. They said that you can tell us color palette, and if I wanted a photo of a human or a drawing, and I said no photos. I just wanted yeah. So it really depends on which publisher. I think other publishing houses have different rules.
Yeah, but your books are connected by the font, I think, the color and
Yeah.
the font. Like you can, they're very distinctive. I think Kate Claiborne's books are very similar like that. The lettering of her covers are just, you know, you just know it's her.
Yes,
Right?
yes. I'm actually going to a conference, and she's going to be there in 2 weeks in Chicago. So I'm super excited. I'm going to meet her, swing by her table.
I had a talk with her like one of these a few months ago, and she's just so really, really interesting. So definitely get sit right next to her. Don't let her move. Not in a toxic way, just
Not in a toxic
she's
way.
a friendly way.
Right.
Uh, I do want to go back to the books in terms of the rom-com aspect of it, because sometimes humor can be, I mean, obviously it's very subjective. So how do you make sure that you feel like it is funny and not mean?
Oh, that's a good question. I think a lot of the humor comes from how I actually have my daily conversations. And I think in general, I try not to hurt people's feelings or try not to be mean. And so I hope that just comes out in my writing. And I think at the essence of all of my characters, they're good people. They don't want to hurt anyone. But it is so subjective. So some things that I think are hilarious, like I've had beta readers like, no, that did not land the way that you think it landed. And I'm like, but in my head, it sounds so good. And I've had some things that I've had to take out, and some things that I didn't mean to be funny. People are like, oh, this is hilarious. I'm like, oh, well, that also wasn't my intention. But I think really because I'm trying to have a sort of shell of kindness throughout my book, that nothing is really done with, ill will. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
How do you incorporate that though when your characters are fighting? Like, because fighting can be pretty mean, especially when you've been vulnerable with somebody. So how do you
Mhm.
handle that?
Oh my gosh, that was so hard. And I keep going back to how Remi and Maya broke up. Oh gosh, I didn't like how she was talking to her. I think it is a really, really fine balance. I try to not put anything in there that they can't recover from, that you can't apologize. Sometimes just in real life, you go too far, you break the mirror, and the mirror is never going to recover. I think that's part of it. And then also, I think it's important that when people are fighting within books or arguing, that they each have valid points, that
Mhm.
the reader has enough background where they're like, she has a point. Well, she has a point too. If
Mhm.
it's just so one-sided, I think you're going to lose the audience a little bit. And it's really going to make that character just not come out great.
Mhm. Well, it also sounds like it would be out of character for them,
Yeah, I
right?
think so too, because they're good people in
Mhm.
general. It's not, I know there's a lot of stories of, like the alpha males or whatever, that they're kind of having this character arc and they're just jerky or whatever. And I don't think my characters are like that. I don't write them to be that way. And so it's maybe a little bit easier
Mhm.
to, be able to recover from that.
Yeah. And again, those kind of things are so subjective. Like things that don't bother me will definitely, could bother somebody else. And so,
Yes.
threading that needle must be really difficult.
It is really difficult. It's interesting because the character Gabriella, who is the owner of the Nueves, I based her so much off of a person in my life that I love. I love this woman to my core, and she is very tough love, and she's very. But I knew her as I knew how much she loved me and my kids, and I thought I had portrayed that, but there were several people who did not like the Gabriella character and thought she was very mean and very gaslighty and whatever. And it was like, oh my gosh, that was not my intention at all. My intention was actually like to honor this woman that I love so much, who gave me like the tough love that I needed, that like made me a better human being, you know. So it's very subjective.
Yeah. And you have to just write what's in your heart because
Right.
we'll all have opinions. And
Yeah,
us
yeah.
romance readers are very vocal about our opinions.
Yes.
Not me, of course. I would,
Of course.
I'm very shy about it. But yeah, so I think that your characters are so fascinating because they do come from, they have the kindness, they have real world arguments, like things that actually could happen to you that I feel like they're super relatable. So through that arc of like, getting to know each other, falling in love, falling out of love, or falling into hate for a little while,
Mhm.
how do you keep it so real for all of these different aspects of a relationship?
I think one of the things that I keep real, or at least what I relate to, um, is the socioeconomic issues within there. So I do not write the billionaire romances, and great for people who do. It's nothing against that genre at all. But I think when people have kind of like they're struggling to make their bills, they're driving a crappy car, like so many of us have been there at some point in our life, whether you're in college or whether you're not in college or whatever it is, that we kind of go through those struggle years. And I think that helps to make that a little bit more relatable, how you're planning dates on a budget, and you don't have the funds to fly to the Eiffel Tower or whatever. You're just, going through your day-to-day life. I think that also helps make it all a little bit more relatable. Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess.
I think that the kind of book that you write is a comfort read for a lot of people because of that, because they see themselves in it. They see a path forward around difficult conversations, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. And I also think bringing in those layers of the family dynamics help, at least, and not in the plan. I wanted really two totally different families. I wanted Charlie to have like an absentee mom and a dad who struggled with addiction, and like he's probably a good man in there and gave her what he could. It just wasn't enough for her to fill her, and then Mac to have this like great dad and this great mom, and and I base Mac's dad so much off of my own dad, and just like how funny and quirky they are. And then same with like in Mock Trouble, I really wanted to show family and how strong family could be and how much that influences people's entire life, so that's always important to me. I think I'm going to always have family in my romance stories.
Well, that's life. Nobody lives on an island, right? Nobody
Right.
lives at
Yeah.
a coffee shop that's on an island to fall down on their true love. So, I mean, it would be unrelatable if you didn't have family and family issues.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny because sometimes I just read a story. I'm actually not going to call it out, and there was no mention of the parents whatsoever from either of the love interests. And I was like, oh, like, but do you have siblings, or do you like are your parents alive? It was so funny how I was questioning that the whole time, just because it has so much influence, I think, on who the people are and who the characters are.
Yeah, I mean, even Disney movies, one of them's going to die, but you at least know that.
Right, right. One of them's going to be evil and one of them's going to be nice. Yeah, yeah, so true.
Exactly. So,
Yeah.
does your publisher provide the totally a little bit off the topic of what we were
Oh
just
yeah.
talking about, but the audiobook narrators, who picks the narrators for your books?
I was actually able to pick based on a few choices. So they had their list And then they kind of narrowed it down, and then they sent me samples of the different narrator actors and narrators. And then I got to choose from that list. And oh my gosh, the woman who does my book, she's so good. She's so good. And I will tell you, it is the trippiest experience I've ever had in my life, hearing somebody read the thoughts that were in my head. In fact, I could not finish Not in the Plan. I started the audiobook and then I had to stop because it was like, she's saying what was in my head. I don't know. It was such a strange experience. And then I did start in Mock Trouble, but I only listened to it snips at a time. And she's fantastic. She captured the characters exactly how I was hoping, but it is just a very odd experience for me.
Mm-hmm. I've heard that from other people that they won't listen to it. It drives them crazy if the names aren't said in the way that they heard them, things like that.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm so lucky that my narrator she was so fantastic. She did it perfectly.
Mm-hmm. I only listen to audiobooks of books I've read already,
Oh,
because for me, then I'm in it for the performance, not the story, because I already know the story. And
mhm.
that's a huge comfort to me as well, because I already know the story. I know it's going to be happy or sad or traumatic or whatever.
Mhm.
So then I just love hearing it like I'm in a theater.
Yes. Oh my gosh, for sure. And I love audiobooks. I end up listening to more audiobooks just in my general life than I do read. And I think it's because kids and work and dogs and whatever, like I can have it in my ear, and I don't have all the time to just like sit down and open a book. So yeah, I love it.
I have to tell you a funny story about audiobooks,
Yes.
since it's just us. I took my car to the shop recently and I was listening to an audiobook, and I got out of the car. He took the car and he comes back with like a little smirk on his face. I'm like, what's that? Because, it's Bluetooth. Like, how can they, like, once you're out of the car, it's not going to play. Well,
Right.
it played, and it was a very spicy, romancing. And I was like, I called up my husband. I was like, we can never come back to this this
Oh my
mechanic.
gosh. Oh my gosh.
I
I
can
would be
never go on this
mortified.
road again. So
Oh,
audiobooks
yep.
can have a huge impact on your life.
Yes. Yes, they do. Oh my gosh, that is hilarious. That is definitely it. That is a fear of mine.
Just
I'll
remember
be in
it.
the kids like school pickup line and it's like, projecting out of the car or something. Oh my gosh.
Yes, I did learn that people can hear you from outside of the car. Yes. So, what was I going to ask you about? Oh my gosh, I completely forgot my question, but I'll think of it. We're almost
Okay.
out of time though. So can you tell me, you said your heteronormative book's coming out at the end of the
Yes.
month. What is that?
Yes.
And when is the third book of this series coming out?
Oh, yes. So, my heteronormative book is coming out at the end of the month. It's called Serving Love. It is I wrote it kind of in honor of my parents because they love Hallmark movies so much. And my dad, he's like, can you write a Hallmark one? I think it was kind of, just wanted me to evolve past my other stories. And so I said, yes, I'm going to write this really sweet Hallmark story. And I loved it. It's about a young guardian over an autistic nephew, and they're living in Duluth, and it's the grumpy sunshine, and she's a server in a cafe, and the new chef, and they don't get along. And I loved it. I worked very closely with an autism advocate and author herself, and so she ended up. At first, we were just kind of swapping things, and then she became my critique partner, my sensitivity reader. She really helped me with that. And then I had a couple other like autistic teachers that were helping me. I really wanted to like capture properly what it was like to raise a neurodiverse child.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, that will be coming out, I think, April 29th. It's called Serving Love. And yeah. Oh, and then my third book in my sapphic series is going to be January 25th. We're trying to, there's my publisher is so kind, but they at first said, can we get it done in April and then we can launch it hopefully in September? And I was like, yes. And then I was like, what am I thinking? No, like I was all excited. And then I'm like, oh, I need more time because I really want to do the characters justice. And yeah, so it will now be coming out in January 2025.
Oh, we'll keep a lookout for it.
Yes, please do.
Last question. Can
Yes.
you recommend one or two other sapphic books that we can look
Oh
for?
my God. Yes. Delilah Green Doesn't Care is just, I love that book. I loved it so much. Oh my gosh. So that is fantastic. It's a Fabulous Life by Kelly Farber is
Mhm.
really good too. It's like a sapphic spin off of the old, is it Jimmy Stewart
Yeah.
movie from like It's a Fabulous Life from back in the day.
It's
And
a
it
Wonderful
is,
Life.
I think that's what it was, but she called it It's a Fabulous Life. But it is a retelling of that story, sapphic style. So it is very, very cute. Yeah, I think I'm going to give you those two. And then anything Rachel Lacey and Casey McQuiston. Oh my gosh. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm all over those.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here tonight, Dana. I know you're not feeling that well, and I so appreciate all the effort you made to answer all of my crazy questions.
Oh, I really appreciate you having me. This was fantastic.
Great. Well, have a wonderful night. And for everybody who's here, I hope you enjoyed our talk, and we will see you at our next program, hopefully. Dana, I look forward to your future books.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.